we are. Oh, hi. Sorry. I needed to be able to see you and see that you're with me. Okay, perfect. So, sorry for that rough beginning. Also, I can't see the chat, Chris. Can you show me real quick where that would be? Oh, here we go. Exciting. Okay, great. Awesome. So, anyhow, welcome to my sorry, let me start over. Welcome to Evie's Gardens, Garden of Evie. I am happy to be with you here on this Thursday afternoon. It is a cool day here in New England. We're getting into the fall days where it gets nice and chilly in the evenings, and during the day it's sunny still and beautiful, but things have definitely had a frost, and we're putting our gardens to bed and completing the tasks we need to do to get our farm ready for the winter. Um, I have been excited to spend this time with you. It's been a couple of weeks. We've been shifting some things around here at Peak Prosperity. And if you're just joining this channel, um, this is a part of the Peak Prosperity channel itself. My husband, Chris Martinson, um, essentially is mostly on this channel doing a lot of his programs, which involve talking about energy, the economy, the environment, and pulling all these things together to make sense of them and saving you and I the time of having to go wrestle all those facts out of the universe. So I appreciate that he does that for me and for us. And if you're interested in joining the community that we have at Peak Prosperity, go to peakprosperity.com and you can find yourself amongst people who are like-minded, who believe similarly, but more importantly, know how to think critically and can talk about some of these diverse subjects and not lose their minds. And speaking of losing minds, what I've been noticing in the last week or two is just how insane things have gotten out there. Have you guys seen that too? It's just amazing to me how somehow we've gotten to the point where we don't know how to be winners and losers anymore. I mean, I remember as a kid, growing up with I was in little league with my brothers, and one of the things we had to do was to be sort of able to lose gracefully and congratulate the other team. And we didn't shave our heads, and we didn't get weird tattoos, and we definitely didn't talk about poisoning anybody. It's just bizarre what's happening following the US elections. And so today I wanted to talk about a couple of things, because what I noticed was that there are a lot of wounded people out there in the world, myself included. And the reason I recognize those wounds is because I have them in my own self. And one of the things I really believe is that we all have a job to do in this life outside of our work and our relationships and our kids. And it's to be able to reflect on ourselves on our own behavior, on our own life and how it's going, and to assess whether or not we have healthy relationships, whether or not we're meeting our own needs for self-care. And I think this is probably more applicable to women in some respects, but not necessarily. I just think the types of self-care that we do might be different. Like I might go and take a nice hot bath with Epsom salts and have a cup of tea if I've had a really rough day. Whereas Chris might want to go outside and saw some logs on our sawmill and get his energy out differently. So what I see and what I saw following the elections here in the US are a lot of people that are just struggling to cope and having a really difficult time doing that. And one of the things that I love talking about the most, I think, is healing, because it's something that, unfortunately, or for better or worse, I've had to spend a large amount of my adult life thinking about. And for some of you who know me better, you probably have seen my presentations on a few of the things that I've actually survived. I'm not going to go into that in any great detail today, but I want to invite anybody, any human that's listening, to tune in if this interests you, because I think we've all suffered pain. We've all had challenges and things that have been super overwhelming. And anybody that's alive at this point in history, living in this world of really utter chaos and this fast-paced life, we don't really have very many opportunities to reflect. And unfortunately, our culture really doesn't encourage us to do that either. For example, we end up scrolling on our phone at night when we're exhausted, and we find other ways to cope with how we feel stressed, but we don't always figure out how to modulate the stress from inside in a way that's actually giving us a new skill. And so I sort of see healing as another word for being adaptive to our environment. And anyhow, so to jump right in, I just want to say I feel like I struggle with the idea that social media is something, or the internet in general, it's not something that I feel is healthy for me somewhere deep down. And so, although I'm coming to you today and I'm bringing this stuff to you, I just have to put a caveat right out in the front and say, I have to try to limit my media, because otherwise it's just this endless streaming of drama into my world. And it's not just visual, it's audio as well. And I think my nervous system, and at least, has not yet figured out how to sort that appropriately so that I don't get wound up from something else going on that really ultimately has no effect on me. Right. And you never know what you're going to see if you're online, because you run into a post or a picture or a video that you're not expecting, and your body has a physiological response that you can't control. And it's, I think, not helpful for me to have additional pieces of that in my system that aren't my story, and to physically and physiologically be in reaction to those things. So I've been trying to be really careful about what I watch or what I choose to spend time on, but I'm noticing that even just the little bits I try to do, there's such an allure to that. There's this fear of missing out that I encounter that really makes me want to check in and see what's going on. And I don't know, I'm worried about missing something, whatever that thing is. I'm not really sure, and it's not always clear. And so I just want to invite you, in your life, whatever you're going through, to just reflect on that and see if it makes sense to be spending as much time on that as you do. And I'm curious if anybody else is having the kind of challenges I am, which is that shit, the stuff is addictive. Like, it's just plain old addictive. And I think they meant it to be that way. And, short of putting parental controls on my own phone or computer, rather, I really am looking to find healthier ways of interacting with it. Thankfully, unlike my husband, Chris Martinson, I don't have, my job and my life don't depend on that. I can be outside doing lots of other things on our farm. And I'm grateful for that, because I don't think I have the mind to be able to take in all of that stuff and filter it all the time. So just as a caveat, I've been noticing that. But back to this idea of healing, and reflecting and trying to assist ourselves with as many tools as possible to be able to process whatever's coming in for us. Our bodies carry lots of stories. So no matter what's happening out there in the world, the reason that it sometimes triggers us to have a strong emotion or a strong feeling come up is because it's touching something inside of us that we already carry around. So for many of the people I see on social media that were just losing their minds in total and utter fear, was for a couple reasons, but one of them is that I think they actually have wounds that they haven't addressed deeply, about their feelings of being inadequate, their feelings of fear of somebody harming them, of this state of being afraid of breaking out of their victimology and becoming their own person. And on some level, they take pride in looking different in some way, and yet they look the same as all the people who try to look different. So it's just this strange anomaly. And I remember it well from adolescence. I'm sure you probably do too, right? So it's just interesting, because I can see that there are unprocessed wounds. And so I'm trying to look at that instead of reacting to it, and just how outrageous it is. And this includes people in my own friend circle as well, and or family. So even though it's frustrating to me, I'm trying to hold compassion, because I know that they're in a place that I was at in many, many years ago, before I started my whole healing journey. And that place was painful and that place was full of projection on other people and unsorted, you know, dirty laundry, essentially. And I didn't mean for it to be that way. My intention was to do good things in the world. But unfortunately, I'd come through such a harrowing childhood of just emotional an emotional desert, if you will, that I just did not have the skills by the time I was dumped out into adulthood to really be able to tackle things and to repair some of the breaks and that I had in my nervous system and my whole emotional view of what the world was like. And so I'm trying to bring that compassion as I see these people. But you know, part of our story and one reason why it's so important to reflect on it is because it's the recipe of who we are. It's actually important that we know what we've gone through and we honor ourselves for that journey that we've been on, because that journey, if you didn't have all those things that had happened to you in your childhood, you wouldn't be who you are now. And it's that fabric, that recipe that is actually something to, like, nobody else in the world is going to understand exactly what our experience was, just like we can. And nobody else really has the time or even the ability to be able to um, sort of appreciate what that might have been like for us. So I find that healing isn't just about looking at what's been challenging or what's hurt or what's been hard or the ways that we've been derailed in our lives at some point. It's also really about recognizing how that has built the person that we are today. Um, and so as we continue, I want to talk a little bit about what some of these processes have looked like, what I think of them. And I've done extensive training in a few of them. I'm not practicing at the moment. And I think at some point in the future, I'll have to decide whether that's something I want to do again with people, because I do want to help. And yet, as an empath, sometimes it can be hard to hear a lot of really difficult experiences that other people are reporting because, again, they trigger those same hurt places inside. But um, I think that we reclaim something when we do our healing work and we're able to get back a part of ourselves that we've lost along the way. And I know that I'm not here to have the easiest ride in this life. I believe I'm here to use myself up completely and to grow and to hone who I am, to let life hone me so I can accomplish what I came here to accomplish. Um, one of the one of the most interesting things that struck me early on in this was something called running towards the roar. I don't know if any of you have heard of this before, but um, it's I don't know who coined it initially. I know Michael Mead wrote about it in his book called The World Behind the World. It's essentially this idea that instead of retreating from scary things, instead of retreating from things that just are absolutely above and beyond what we think we can handle, we actually run towards that instead. And he says, quote, "A false sense of security is the only kind there is. For those who seek security in a rapidly changing world, run right into the teeth of one dilemma or another. It might be better to run towards the roar and learn what it means to live in a time of many endings. In the end, the only genuine security can be found in taking the risks that the soul would take. For the old soul in the human psyche knows that the whole thing has hung by a thread all along." I just love that. I think it's really well written. Um, so running towards the roar is something that takes a lot of courage. And whether it's a healing process or something you just really don't want to take on or do, something you dread, it takes sort of digging really deeply. And when I was younger, I got to the run towards the roar part probably in my mid-20s. But before that, it was just that I was so wounded. I had to find a resource. And so I was driven originally out of just desperation, like, help. I need some help. There's got to be somebody somewhere that can be a resource for me that can help guide me out of this darkness. Like, I just felt like I was in the dark night of the soul when I was about 20 years old or so. And it just continued until my mid 30s, I'd say. And even after that in some respects. But um, so when I was learning about this process, one of the one of the first things I had to do was acknowledge the hurt. I had to say, wow, I was really badly injured emotionally. And and for me, that was realizing that I was sexually abused as a child, that I had gone through emotional abuse, that I had narcissistic parents, that I didn't have people that were able to reflect me back to me, and that I really needed help in fixing these things. Like, there was no self-help book I could read. There was no um, quick and easy way or quick and easy fix that I was going to find, because what had happened to me had happened over such a long period. And so it was this chronic level of dysfunction I'd lived with. And my nervous system was a mess because of that. My nervous system really knew on some level that it had survived like catastrophic events, and that it really didn't care on some level about like getting a good grade in history class. Oops. Or that's funny. Or figuring out how to write the best essay. It just didn't care. And so I found myself in college really struggling to focus. Um and my body had these patterns that I didn't understand. For example, um I would really have trouble forcing myself to do certain things. And then I would have this strange sleepiness come over me out of nowhere. Like, I just could not force myself to stay awake. And it got so bad that I actually thought maybe it was a health issue or whatnot. And I got a bunch of blood work done. Nope. It wasn't that there was something wrong with my body. It was that I think my psyche was protecting itself. And that's a way that my body and my mind had, joined up to keep me out of harm's way, or so they thought. And so it's what I want to talk about today a little bit is how interesting it is and how relevant it is that what we feel gets addressed, because eventually, if we don't do that, it can actually turn into a physical issue. It can turn into an autoimmune disease. It can turn into chronic pain. And that's just so unpleasant and unnecessary. But really, it's a beautiful signal that our body gives us if we're not able to process things, if we're not heeding the cues that we're getting emotionally and mentally. Our body finally is that last ditch effort to like, hey, we got to clear this out of our nervous system. Come on, let's get on with it. And so I'm kind of grateful for that, even though it can be painful. Um, I experienced a lot of anxiety when I was a young adult, and a bit of depression seasonally. And I was just miserable. Anxiety was just like horrific to deal with when you're trying to execute tasks as an adult. In my case, I was a single mom, and it was incredibly difficult to be sort of forcing myself to, do all the things I had to do in a day, and to not feel good, and to feel inner terror was just like, ugh. And if I could go back and tell my younger self anything, it would be that even though it didn't feel like I was making progress, that I was on the right track. Um, so seeking when you're seeking somebody to help you, I'm sure you've heard this before, but not everybody's qualified for that. Um, it's not like if you take plenty of vitamin C, you're never going to get a cold. It's not a one size fits all thing in the least bit, probably even less than like our physical body, because our emotional body and our spiritual body are shaped by the things that have happened to us. And those things, like I said at the beginning, are absolutely unique to who we are. And so we're not going to, the thing that helps my best friend, or the thing that helps my husband or my child, it's not going to be the thing that necessarily resonates with me. Although it tends to be that in families, people are drawn together because of woundedness initially. Like when you're attracted to somebody, part of that attraction is a physiological, biological attraction. And a part of that is also because intuitively you sense that there's something there that resembles the family system you might have grown up in. And so I think we seek that in effort to actually resolve it and heal some of the things that we experienced. But anyhow, when you're s- when you're finding people for that, especially when you're already sort of in a state of being completely over the tips of your skis, it's really hard to reach out and sort of put yourself out there to some stranger and start that relationship. So one of the best advice I would give if I could talk to myself when I was younger is don't go in, don't go try to find somebody to help you like this when you're in crisis. Create that relationship when you're having a better time. Because when you're in crisis, everything changes. It's really difficult to judge things accurately. And when you're feeling emotionally vulnerable and just you need to lick your wounds, it's not the time to be trying to interview people and make those critical decisions. Um, so that's something that I highly recommend for everybody because I feel like it's so important that we have emotional wellness and agility and resilience in our lives. And it's absolutely as important as, being able to walk around without pain or, um, having our blood sugar function right. It's just everything is connected. And so um, I found that I found that having a relationship with somebody that I trust and deepening that and staying connected with that regardless of what's going on. So if great things are happening in my life, excellent. If it's a little darker and I'm struggling with some stuff, that person's there and I'm not picking it up and putting it down. It's a consistent relationship that I can depend on. And by the way, um, part of the modalities, which I'm going to share in a minute, that I've found to be so helpful, they also are meant to help me process joy because um, it, and I'm going to talk about this more too in a minute, but everything that we experience that we shut down around, if we're afraid of getting rejected by somebody, if we're really struggling um, to not get super angry with somebody, like all the things that we create armor for ourselves around, those things also keep us from feeling the love that we really deserve to feel and that we all ultimately have to offer one another as well. So there's a huge benefit to this reflecting that you can do with a trusted practitioner. One of the other things that I learned was any wound that is created by another human being must be healed in relationship. And that, I'll just say it again, any wound that is created by another being must also be healed in relationship. So there's something that repairs when you're in a scenario that's similar to what happened, but the outcome is different. So for me, I had trouble feeling like there were any adults in the room when I was a child and that there was somebody who was going to appropriately pay attention to me and see me and take care of me and set boundaries and make sure I was safe. And so that comes up in relationship with a therapist too. I feel that same sense of I project essentially what I experienced as a child onto whoever is helping me and coaching me with these things. Um and so I think that in my experience I've found that it's just been essential to try and just let myself be in that process, knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes and that, if I've done my homework and chosen a good person to be in relationship with, that I will actually get the healing that I'm meant to have and be able to come out of it with less fear about relationships and better skills around communicating and all the things. Um, I found that the next thing I wanted to talk about was that practicing any modality is going to be re-stimulative. And that's normal. Um, by the time I had gone to seek help with some of the burdens that I was carrying as an early adulthood, I was already kind of in crisis, and I didn't want like I was so hurt and so over like my over what's the word I'm looking for? Just completely overwhelmed that I didn't want to be stimulated by anything at all. Like my body was trying to shut down, which is what it was telling me when I kept getting sleepy all the time. It was just in a state of collapse. And so it was actually really hard um, to go every week knowing that I would feel worse after a session sometimes. And I didn't understand and make the connection that I had to go through that additional trial of being in there that week, and talking about the things that were so painful because on the other side of it, I would regain something of my health back. But in the moment, it was so hard. It was really painful. Um, uh, your ability, sometimes my ability to be with pain is directly related often to a memory as well. So my fears, the things at deep down in my soul, the things I'm deathly afraid of as a human, whatever those core beliefs are, those tend to show up fractally in the way I am coping with things as well. And so sometimes when I'm feeling really confused or I just can't figure something out, often the emotions that I end up feeling when that happens are exact replicas of what I felt when I was a very young child. And so everything, if I look at it like that, it's just a tell, it's data. It's not something to judge myself for or be hard on myself about. It's just like, yeah, wow, this is what it was like for me. Wow. And I really start to appreciate my own experience as a result, which I think is the whole point of this is to be able to reflect and to see, like, I want to be able to see who I am, and I can't see myself very well. Right. And I don't know if it's just a me thing or if it's a larger human condition. I can see other people really well. I just can't appreciate myself sometimes, and I'm hardest on myself. I imagine there must be people out there that can relate to this. And so, for me, I've learned that there are younger parts of me inside that are learning to trust that, they're not all alone, that there's an adult in the room with them now. And even though things feel a little more intense after doing some of these therapies or whatever, that the associations I have are just a memory, that I'm going to get through that. I'm going to feel better. I'm reclaiming something important, and I'm exercising my capacity for holding other emotions, for being able to feel more deeply. And often I think the discomfort I felt early on and in most of my life has been when I'm pushing things away, when I'm trying to shove feelings I don't want to feel out. And that takes a lot of energy and effort. And I find that it takes up a lot of bandwidth as well. And so when I'm finally in a space where and now I feel, because I'm more well versed in how this process works, I can be accepting of all the different states that I'm in and try to appreciate them for what they are, and to just let them flow through, because they're just like the weather. It'll change, it'll come through, it'll be stormy, it'll be rainy and soggy and wet, and then on the other side of it, the sun comes back out and it's warm again. And so I've gone through the cycle enough times that I recognize that. And thank goodness for that, right? It's amazing. It's amazing that this healing is possible. And I'm here to tell you that I really believe that it is. And I believe that we have a responsibility as people to do this. Nobody can do it for us, unfortunately. And it's worth it. Um, even the fear of pain itself can be a memory. So, um, when we're kids, we don't have the coping skills, and we also don't have the full consciousness to be able to see, like I was just saying, and we don't have the tools. And so a lot of things that we avoid because we're not skilled and we don't know how to handle something. And so running towards the roar, a big part of that is just saying, you know what, I don't know how to do this, and I'm going to do this, right? It's sort of confronting that head on and being conscious of those places where there are gaps in knowledge, gaps in skills, and discomfort. And that's okay. It's okay to be like, what is going on here? I feel confused. I feel alone. It's actually a huge part of being a human and being authentic. And that's beautiful. I think that's really beautiful. Um, and so these things shift and change over time. I kept journals from my healing journeys, and it's incredible that um, I how much change happens, right? 10 years ago is not the same. 5 years ago is incredibly different. Even last year, I was different. And the things and the challenges, like I can see that there's an evolution going on, which is exciting and heartening for sure. And anyway, I wanted to go over to the chat for a minute and see what I found because I'm glad that there are people here and I'm happy to highlight a few of these things. If you have a question or a comment or whatnot, um, please put it in the chat. I will see them. We have a new program now that allows us to see the comments in real time, which is great. So somebody said, how does it feel saying my husband is a sage fly baby? You know, it feels awesome. It's been such a long time coming. And Chris and I really have had, it's just, we're so fortunate to be with each other. And we've been together for a long time, but it's incredibly special to be able to say that now. I love it. And I'm grateful. And I don't know what it's like for him, but I know for me, I definitely enjoy it. Um, this person says, Eldroth 410, my mother wants to sell our Florida property and no longer travel down from Canada. She's worried. Wow. So I'm guessing that's in relation to the election happening. There's so many people really struggling with that. You're not alone. I'm sorry to hear that that's going on, but shoot, maybe there's a we have a lot of people we have to bring back to sanity, right? If we can, although it's not our job, which is also the other part. Um, let's see. And the same person said, I always try to incentivize my wife to stop scrolling Facebook. I see her go down the rabbit hole all the time, and her mood visibly changes every night when she does. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I noticed that too. With in relation to being on specific apps too, like Facebook makes me like depressed as I'll get out. I'm ready to end my life if I stay on Facebook for too long. And I don't say that lightly. It's just it feels like it's this everybody's putting their sort of facade on to show how amazing their life is. And it's just gross to me. Um, but I think that these programs were designed to do just that. So I think unfortunately, it sounds like she's being affected by it like I am, where it's affecting her mood and potentially other things, but it's designed to be super, super addictive. And there's nothing wrong with her for that. There's something wrong with these companies that have decided that they can hijack our reward system and our dopamine and do things to keep us from wanting to tune in with our real life, like our physical reality here. Like, I don't want to be up in my head all the time. I want to experience life. And at some other point, I want to talk, probably not today, but I want to talk about what we can do to sort of break out of these places where, media has such a hold on us psychologically and emotionally. Thank you for your comment. Um, Somebody says, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Sometimes a relationship seems great while you're in a good place, but then when you have trouble, the person lets you down. Hmm. Yeah, I know it can feel like that. I know it can. I've experienced that too, where I remember there was somebody I dated back in high school where if I was having a good day, I was like, "Yeah, I wanna stay in this relationship." And then when I would be having a bad day, I honestly could it was all I could do to stop myself from breaking up with that person. And that was, I think, primarily based on my own sort of not really sure that I was into them in the first place, and I just didn't know how to tell myself that, but it is hard. Relationships are hard anyway, and there's so much that we can't control because it's about being together with another person. It's not about controlling that other person at all, and it's about being in this duality, in this dance of masculine and feminine or opposite energies, call them whatever you want. And and I think it's actually meant to help us grow, which is something I've been learning about as well, right? It's if my life was easy, if I didn't have challenges, then would I be would I be getting the skills that I want to have in my life? There's something about adversity that's absolutely helped me to be a better person. There's something about having somebody not agree with me that forces me to review my own arguments about something to see if maybe my beliefs are rigid or if there's a way I can meet them halfway, or they're just ways that life causes us to have to exercise our emotional abilities and mental abilities and even physical abilities where without that I don't think we would be growing at the same rate. Um, so back to what I want to continue talking about. Um, so pain and pleasure are two sides of the same coin, right? Our capacity to have a wonderful time with somebody and our capacity to feel the depths of despair are both um, important for us to feel alive as a person. One of the things that I don't like that our media does, or a lot of our technology does, is it is hijacking our dopamine, and so we're not able to enjoy or that range of things that we typically would be exciting for us or that we'd get a thrill out of. That changes, right? It's just like I think with pornography, it's an easy example. The more porn people watch, the more over time they have to watch like things that are more and more edgy or just hardcore in order to get that same thrill because your brain is a very complex machine that likes to stay in balance. And so getting to those highs takes more and more effort. Same thing for people that really enjoy like thrill seeking. I mean, we all do it to some extent, right? We're all chasing dopamine all day long. When we're eating, that piece of chocolate cake that we really want, we're getting a hit of dopamine from that. When we're posting something online and we're getting a thumbs up, we're getting dopamine from that. When we check if somebody replied to our message, like it's just we live in that world. So to learn how to navigate it and to learn how to manage it for ourselves is, I think, um, really prudent. And the way our emotional capacity works is over time. When you first get into a pool of water or you go swimming, it can feel cold no matter what temperature it is. It can be a little chilly. And then over time, you're like, oh, wow, that's not that bad. And then by the end of it, you're diving around in the water. It feels perfectly fine. You might as well be taking a bath. It it's similar in our emotional capacity. And now there are lots of ways that people have figured out how to hijack and work with our like biohacks that can help us understand our nervous system, that can help us to increase that capacity. And in fact, using cold ice water is one of those things, as well as people use saunas and red light therapy. And there's a lot of things, but um, exercising our capacity is critical to being a full throated human being living here having our best lives, expressing ourselves the way we would like to, and having the depth of friendships and relationships that we really want to. And so, um, what I've experienced and what's been helpful, I'm just going to list a few of these because it's hard to know where to start, right? There are different types of therapies based on what you're struggling with and what you need. And I've had a I've had to go through quite a few to find what ones worked for me, but I just want to highlight a couple of those so you have a sense of what what could be helpful or a good place to start. If you haven't done any work before at all, and it's your first time hearing a lot of these terms, um, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what like a trained psychologist or social worker, that's typically what they have been trained in and know how to do. That's what is also colloquially, I can't talk today. Colloquially, no, I'm not even gonna try. It's what's known as talk therapy. That therapy is great. It helps create an awareness or a map of where you are and what you've gone through, and to hear yourself say those words out loud sometimes is really critical. I'm not going to discourage that at all. It's great. I think it's helpful at the beginning part when you're just learning about what's going on and you haven't told your story before. So as a younger person, in this culture where we don't talk about um, mastering our emotionality at all in our school systems, that's a helpful educational thing to do. I got to the point where I was going faithfully to therapy and I was talking to people about what was troubling me, but it wasn't changing what was going on inside my nervous system because it was just words. And I couldn't get at a lot of the things that I had experienced as a very young child because those things happened pre-verbally. So um, there's a big advantage to doing some of that initially, but then you might want to try some other things. Um, I started out doing EMDR, which is it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And what you're doing when you do EMDR was originally founded by this woman, Dr. Shapiro, but she found that she was walking in a park one night and she was troubled by some things and she was thinking about them. And beside her on each side were some streetlights and she was looking left and right and just sort of casting her eyes from side to side. And she found that she felt better. So then she started diving into that and did a whole study and created what's now known as EMDR. And this was back in like, I think the mid 80s or so. So it's a relatively new-ish modality, but what I came to know about it that I found interesting and in layman terms, what happens with EMDR is that similar to when we're sleeping and when we're in REM, our eyes go back and forth, left, right, left, right. A similar thing happens. So that's how our brain is processing for some reason. And I don't know all the physiology behind it, but when we're in that state of sleep and brain waves, our brain can file away all the things that we were thinking about that day or whatever happened. It just puts it all away for us. And so, similarly, when we're in an emotional state that's heightened and really intense, and it's hard to even talk about because of how many emotions are attached to it, the left, right simulates that same process and helps our brains to be able to disconnect from it enough to be able to file it appropriately. Um, I actually think EMDR has a huge role to play in helping people that have extreme like PTSD, anxiety. I'm not sure how well it works on depression. I haven't read up on that, but um, it's a great tool for sure. And there's another one that's kind of similar called EFT, which is the emotional freedom technique, which is a tapping technique. And similarly, it's a way of stimulating the brain in order to help process and sort of detune one's high emotional state, if that's a thing. I've done it before when I've had a panic attack or something like that, and it definitely seemed to help. I noticed my heart rate was different. I could feel my blood pressure change, my breathing, things of that nature. And you tap in different places on your face, and there's a whole sort of set of tappings you do, and then you wait and see how you feel. And if you don't feel different, you do it again. And I'm sure it's much larger in study than that, but from what I remember, it's definitely helpful as a tool. And I also did something which is called core energetics. And core energetics is another it's a somatic tool. So it's body oriented, but it's also tying in spirituality, and it's looking at our early childhood development. And it's great in a lot of ways. Um, but I did that with not a full understanding of what I was coping with. And my nervous system just could not handle that. Like, it was like I unzipped my skin and all my guts fell out when I did that. I was just like, oh my word. And it didn't make my symptoms better, it made them worse. So, depending on what you've gone through and what you're looking to address, some of these are better and worse. But again, it's all about what is best for each person, right? And the one of my favorites, my last two are my favorites of all time. IFS, which is internal family systems. That's about identifying all the ways we fragmented in our childhood. Like, we have younger selves, think of it as like a holograph of who you are. You've got parts and pieces of who you were when you were 3 years old, and parts of you that were there 4 years ago, and they're all kind of jumbled together. And IFS is about naming those things. It's about being with those parts, and in your mind, almost like reminds me of when I was a kid and I'd make up stories and have an imaginary, adventure or whatever. You tackle a problem by inventing the solution. And you're using your imagination to step through these exercises, but it's actually really effective. And this is also why I know our technology is so bad for us in some ways, because the brain, I think, doesn't always know how to differentiate between what's real and what's false. And so, you know, there are myriad ways that I think the technology exists for memories to be implanted, just for us to be manipulated. And it's just dangerous. I think they're playing with fire, and I don't think it's going to end well. But nevertheless, um, IFS is really gentle. It's not somebody, talking incessantly at you, or even you talking about your story. Although you can tell your story for sure. It's a beautiful blend. And so I found IFS to be a lifesaver. That's actually when things started to turn around for me. I was probably 30, my early 30s. And I found that modality, and it made a huge difference because it was gentle enough for somebody who had, grown up in a cult situation, gentle enough for, sexual abuse survivor, blah, blah, blah. So, and the last thing is what and I got trained in the IFS as well. But the last thing that I really love is somatic experiencing. And somatic experiencing therapy is about just learning how to be with your body's sensations and bringing your attention to whatever is going on in any given moment. So, like right now, I could breathe out and just sit with whatever I feel in my body. I'm not trying to focus on a story and perseverate in my mind. I'm just being with whatever's here. Might be nothing. Might be my belly feels tight, or I feel tightness in my chest, or I feel pain in my ankle. But whatever that is, it's just this sort of, it brings together and weaves this neurological, physical, physiological, emotional, it's all these things together. And I really enjoy it because it's a simple framing. It's easy to remember. And it's it feels empowering in a lot of ways. So it's not like, oh, there's all this stuff I don't know, and you over here, the practitioner, has all the answers and I don't. It's different than that. And I find that for me as a human, it's been incredibly powerful. And one of the things that they say about it is they say trauma is a fact of life. It does not have to be a life sentence. And somatic experiencing work rather, looks at all of these feelings as totally normal, all these reactions as totally normal. And it's just like, yay, this is normal and it's great and it's healthy. Let's learn how to feel it and be with it and not pathologize it and turn it into something that's chronic and lasts forever and that we can never get out of and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so some of the takeaways I wanted to just go over. So to exist in this world, we create an outer shell to insulate us. That's normal. That's just what humans do. Sometimes we're stifling our own, and sometimes we're trying to block out pain from outside. That's also just a normal human response. We do this with our breath and by not breathing deeply. We do this with our muscles in our body. We do this with our posture and when we're holding and tensing ourselves and our shoulders, our muscles. A lot of that is bracing that we do to keep things out or to keep things in or keep people away. It's also a totally normal human thing to do. We do this by distracting ourselves with things that don't allow those feelings to surface, like endless scrolling or multitasking. And by multitasking, I mean like stacking things where you're vacuuming, but you also have a podcast on, which podcasts are great, but sometimes they take us out of our present moment. They take us out of our body. They keep us from being with whatever activity we're doing in our physical self. And so that can actually be an issue over time if we do it all the time. And it's just something to notice, like when you have a moment by yourself, what are you inclined to do? Like what draws you? Are you able to sit and be in silence with yourself? Are you able to be in the car without listening to something? It's something to challenge ourselves with, I think. And studies find, and this is what's interesting to me, is that people who suffer trauma in childhood end up with autoimmune issues. So a lot of the chronic health issues that people suffer from come from trauma. And it's not that it's trauma living in your body causing the pain necessarily. It's that, it's not like it's causing, like you had a terrible fight with your mom when you were 9 and now you have swelling in your legs because of that. It's more that it changes your brain chemistry over time. And so coping with this stuff and not actually moving it through and processing it kind of ups the possibility that we could end up with chronic health issues. And for some reason, women seem to be more susceptible to that, but it makes sense, right? We're the creatures that are feeling and sensing into stuff. And when all of those abilities that we have to sense are either blocked or completely full with other data, it can be toxic. Like life is about flow and energy getting through our whole system. And, similarly to emotions, like not getting stuck, being able to move through. So takeaways for today: it takes immense courage to face some of the scariest truths in our lives. Yet I believe that is what we are here for. 2, like any lifestyle change, healing takes practice. It is a practice. It is as unique as you are. And unfortunately, healing is not a one and done, but we are worth working at something that will make us happier and healthier. Creating a dedication to the self, to softening, to listening and being with whatever comes up. Try to welcome every feeling and thought and imagine that has something to teach us. 5, if we want to heal, we must change our capacity to feel everything. We must expand our ability to sit with what causes discomfort without needing to change it, which is like a PhD level I have not reached. If we want to heal, we must change our if we can allow the pain that we feel to roam freely in expression until it is said what our heart needs to hear, and when our heart is able to hear its message, the pain will eventually subside. And last, by working on how we process things in the world, we free up our own bandwidth to love more fully and to be faithful witness to our own unfolding. Of course, I want to add to that, when we can do that for ourselves, we can successfully do that in a friendship or in a partnership and for our children, right? The more present we are able to be with our own processes, then we have less going on internally and we can be there for the people that we really love and want to spend time with. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits. So if you have encountered insanity as a result of the elections, but more broadly because our world is being marketed to us in a wild and chaotic way, consider that a lot of those people are really in need, and they're in need of some love and comfort, and that they're struggling. And the best thing we can do for them is to model what taking responsibility for ourselves looks like. And before we go, I have something to read to you. It's one of my favorite poets. Her name is Mary Oliver. And she says, oh, by the way, before I read this, Chris and I are going to be talking next Thursday, about this very issue, but we're going to look at it from the masculine and the feminine, because there's some really interesting things about what happens when people get out of balance that way, that I think has a narrative to tell us about what's going on in our larger world. So tune in next week for that. That'll be, I think, fun to go journey through together. This poem is called Mindful. It says, "Every day I see or hear something that more or less kills me with delight, that leaves me like a needle in the haystack of light. It was what I was born for, to look, to listen, to lose myself inside this soft world, to instruct myself over and over in joy, in acclamation. Nor am I talking about the exceptional, the fearful, the dreadful, the very extravagant, but of the ordinary, the common, the very drab, the daily presentations. O good scholar, I say to myself, how can you help but grow wise with such teachings as these? The untrimmable light of the world, the ocean's shine, the prayers that are made out of grass." Again, that's Mindful by Mary Oliver. And I just want to thank everybody for being here with me today, and go have a wonderful rest of your day. Get your hands in the dirt, take your shoes off, put your feet in the soil before it's too freezing, at least if you're in an area where there's going to be winter soon. And otherwise, many blessings to you, and I will see you again next week. Thanks again.